Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Maria. I'm the K through 12 school program specialist at the Esherick Museum, and I am so excited to welcome you to Imprint 2024. Thank you so much for joining us. My colleagues from the museum are standing by to help me answer any questions that you may have, so please keep yourself on mute for the duration of the program and put those questions in the chat. And then I'm going to give you time at the end to unmute yourselves and make any comments or ask any questions. So I want to start by thanking all of the marvelous students and teachers and families and donors who made this show possible. You know, on a personal note, when I was working on this show, I couldn't help but think about how we hear so often about how arts education is disappearing in schools. In my own alma mater, and I was there a long time ago. I think we had one class and it was called art. So I wanted to personally thank all of you. You're doing such important work to keep the arts alive in schools, and we're so pleased to be able to support you in this way. So that brings me to what we're doing here today. This is the 16th imprint with the Esherick Museum. It's our annual high school printmaking competition and exhibition. This year, we received about 104 entries from around 11 schools in the Philadelphia area. So printmaking, as many of you probably know, was such an important part of Esherick's career. It marked the transition for him from painting to woodworking. And we'll discuss that more in just a second, a little bit of his work. First, a few more shout outs. You know, I am a great admirer of the arts, but I am not an artist or a printmaker myself. And when I saw this year's amazing submissions, I thought, oh my gosh, how are we going to take over 100 beautiful prints and whittle them down to about 20? So luckily I had the help of some local printmaking artists. So I wanted to thank our guest jurors, Garth and Nikki Gilliam, who are here with us today, and we'll hear from them in just a few moments. So I'm so glad that they're here. So first I wanted to take just a few minutes to look at some examples of how Esherick interpreted the theme of rhythms before we take a look at how you all did so this year. So for me, the first thing that came to mind was the literal definition of rhythm when I thought about this year's theme, which was so present in Esherick's life. He was surrounded by music and dance. This photo comes from around 1920. Esherick and his family were very influenced by rhythmic dance in particular. So if you're like me, that may be the first time you're hearing that phrase. You may not be familiar with rhythmic dance outside of the context of Esherick. I certainly wasn't. So a little background. Rhythmic dance is sort of like dance and gymnastics. It involves using props like balls and ropes and hoops and ribbons. The goal of rhythmic dance is to express music and movement creatively and dynamically, and it sought to connect people to nature, and nature was something that Esherick was so passionate about, and it's very present in his work. So this photo in particular comes from the Gardner Doing dance camp. The Esherick family were very heavily involved with them. They were located in the Adirondacks, and the family became involved with them at around 1920. The camp itself was established in 1916. Esherick created the massive dance finale sculpture sitting in the sculpture well at the museum for the Gardner Doing camp. The camp also served as a source of inspiration for his watercolors. If you're interested in finding out more about that, I recommend checking out our recent spotlight talk on the Gardner Doing Dance Camp on our YouTube channel, or by going to whartonesherickmuseum.org/programs and exhibitions/past programs. We can also maybe link that for you in our follow-up email if you're interested. A couple of Wharton's prints depicting some of the rhythmic dancing he might have seen at the camp. On the left, we have Rhythms from 1922, and on the right, Rhythms Opening, which dates to 1923 and was made, ironically enough, for a sort of pamphlet for the Gardner Doing dance camp. He would barter these prints for attendance fees at these camps, so they acted sort of like money, which I always thought was kind of interesting. So look at the way he uses line in these works to suggest such vibrant movement and rhythm. Another great source of movement in Esherick's life was the theater, namely the Hedgerow Theater, which still is a small community theater about a half hour away from Esherick's studio, and it's in Rose Valley, Pennsylvania. It was established in 1923 and founded by Esherick's friend Jasper Dieter. Esherick did a lot of work for the Hedgerow Theater. If you've been to the studio, you might have seen his famous hammer-handled chairs, which paid his daughter's tuition for the Hedgerow Theater acting school. Another example of his work kind of taking on the form of money. This photo of Esherick's prismatic set design comes from a 1930 production of Heinrich Ibsen's When We Dead Awaken, which I personally wasn't familiar with, but is about a sculptor kind of reflecting on his life. So it kind of sounds familiar. A couple of prints depicting the hedgerow. On the left, we have hedgerow interior, a wood engraving dating to 1929. And on the right, hedgerow snow. I almost missed the deer in the foreground looking me right in the face. I see so much movement in the snow with those diagonal lines kind of moving across the image. So many of Esherick's prints capture the movement and rhythms of nature as well. One of the ways we suggested that you interpret this year's theme, and you did such an amazing job of it, we were so impressed with it, was interpreting the movement and rhythms of everyday life. So a big part of Esherick's life was sailing. He was an avid sailor. If you look closely enough, you can see nautical themed accents around the studio. And this became the theme of a lot of his prints. On the left, we have the lee rail, which dates to 1925. Look at the movement he captures there. He kind of puts you on the boat with him. I feel like I'm on the boat with him. And on the right, we have free, also 1925. Look at how he handles the boat's wake and the movement of the water. So that's all I had for you on the topic of Esherick and rhythms. Moving right along, as I mentioned at the top, I wanted to take a moment to hear from our jurors before we get into this year's winners. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie Garth now. Take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much, Maria. Hi, everybody. It's really really nice to see your faces after looking at your work for so often. As Maria said, we were really impressed with everything you had to show, and I'm really looking forward to all of you getting to see the winners. But you all did an amazing job. So thank you, and thank you so much to the museum and Maria, Nikki, Ethan, Larissa for having me. I'm excited to talk to you all. So let me first make sure. Can you all see my screen? We're good to go? Okay, great. So when WEM asked me to give a talk, they suggested talking about the power of print and a little bit about my own path into printmaking and my work. I started here. I often start here because I think this says a lot about the ethos of printmaking that a lot of people follow, which is this idea that having access to the means of production guarantees you can be heard. And because printmaking is then tied to ideas around publishing and information distribution, everyday material culture, and the economy, it means we can see print everywhere. So a sort of natural place to talk about this might be by introducing the idea of a broadside, which is sort of a more everyday version of a fine art print like what you all made. It's just by far the most popular ephemeral format that's used throughout printed history, and it's single sheets of paper printed on one side only. So again, very close to what you all did. This is America's first broadside, sort of so considered to be for the sale of a horse. So you might be imagining somebody like this right now and maybe getting a little bored, but broadsides also include things like this. Protest posters like these from 1968 in France. And this is where we really get to their potential for social power. Of course, a huge component of that social power happened with printed books specifically. But I want to talk about print even before that, because we're all born as printmakers. And some of us argue that even the first known cave art is a series of prints. Many of us wear prints every day, and we buy prints without even thinking about it. We identify our essentials with print. And even payment itself has a long history of proving its legitimacy by the controlled distribution of printed objects. This goes on all the way to everything like this. So now with the advent of digital printmaking and drop shipping, a print can be something that happens essentially without any visibility to its customer or audience. This thing does not actually exist as anything but a digital image until you order it. A print has happened and then it gets dropped on your doorstep. And of course, those very things that we're buying and everything else are marketed to us very often with print. But all of that started out looking a lot more like this. This is a detail from a really beautiful book of woodcuts called, I don't speak German, so I'm not going to try to pronounce it, but it's called The Printer from the Book of Trades. And you might sort of think of it looking like this Hiroshige woodcut from 1940. But it was the advent of a process called lithography that really set the pace for commercial print publishing. If any of you are interested in pursuing more fine art printing, lithography is essentially a medium that is based on the fact that oil and water repel each other. So it uses a lot of grease, which then holds the ink, and water, which takes ink away from any greased area. It was accidentally invented by a man named Alois Senefelder in the 1700s because he put his greasy hand on a limestone and it somehow copied his grocery list onto the stone. So what I think is really interesting about this is that this set the pace for commercial print publishing. Huge presses really began to proliferate, like the size of entire warehouses, so that before the advent of desktop publishing and digital interfaces, any photograph that you ever saw in a magazine or an advertisement or book was in fact a lithographic print. So you have probably seen a lot of prints that you don't realize necessarily how much DNA it has in common with what you submitted to this competition. And then of course Xerox took off, right? So desktop publishing became a very accessible way for an individual to have their voice heard. I'm just old enough that I remember the part of childhood that existed without computers and without the internet, which I think you probably all are like imagining me about to roll into a coffin. But I promise I'm not that old. But I will just sort of try to emphasize and explain to you that the internet completely and radically changed the way that people communicate. So to give this some context, before you would have had to have a patron or a corporation that owned one of these very large pieces of machinery, a high degree of skill with which to access it. And that was like if you didn't have this Xerox, this was really your first opportunity to be heard, especially a few years later as desktop printing became available. So in the time before the internet, this was the only way to communicate with people other than having like a conversation with them or sending them a piece of mail or calling them on the phone. So otherwise, like if you wanted to distribute your own art or words, the things that you had to say had to be palatable to someone with the money and connections to get your work officially printed. This was a way around all of that. And it was a huge opportunity for countercultural nodes to develop. That legacy now continues in the way that various artists approach and critique the internet space, which is also, I should say, not free in the way that we think it is. We have to use our data, our privacy, and attention to participate for the benefit of these mega conglomerates. So I did a project with a friend, Tracy Hahn, in the year 2020, began during lockdown, and the idea was to take advantage of the benefits of digital culture to ultimately place us back in that more haptic, embodied space. It's called Quarantine Public Library, and it allowed users from all over the world to print single-page works of art that fold into 8-page mini zines. I think a lot of you are probably very familiar with this format. You sit down, you fold it, you make a little snip in the middle, and suddenly this flat sheet of paper has become an 8-page book. So our goal here was to put work by established artists and other creators into people's hands. Because, as I'm sure many of you remember, especially having had to attend online school at this time, we were all sort of held captive by the internet. It was sort of a double-edged sword where it was this thing that was allowing us so much proximity to others, and yet it was putting us in a place that was very disembodied. It was this sort of virtual barrier. So the idea of actually holding something new, a new piece of art, when you couldn't, say, go to a bookstore and just pick up a book or look at something with a friend sitting next to you, but know that they were also holding the same book as you, that became very interesting and special to us. So we wanted people to be able to hold art even if they couldn't leave and see it. And so we offered books from nearly 200 visual artists, poets, researchers, illustrators, and other practitioners. So if you go there now, you can print out any one of those 200 or all 200 and make your own collection of little artist books, little zines. So that project was influenced and aided by my experience working in graphic design. And that's all a big part of how I came into being an artist myself. Um, I grew up all over the place, moving a lot every few years. And I spent a lot of time alone in the company of books and the internet. And I think the most important thing for me to say is that I did a lot of crafts and drawing, but I didn't conceive of myself as a visual artist at all. And I think what I had internalized was this idea that there wasn't really anything legitimate to do as an adult unless it had salary, benefits, and a desk, probably. There was probably a desk with a phone ringing that nobody wanted to answer. That was how you became an adult. So even though I spent all of my time doing these things, again, not to age myself, but there were a lot of like forums where you could upload digital photos and sort of pre-Facebook social media in which you could sort of teach yourself a little bit of HTML or CSS in order to make it more visually interesting. So that sort of without knowing it, I was teaching myself how to make websites using a camera as an outlet. I was sort of unintentionally making myself be a graphic designer. I didn't know that there could be a job like that. So when it was time to go to college, I thought I was going to be a theater major. I ended up watching a documentary called Helvetica, and I really thought like I want to do that. I hadn't before understood that manipulating the word image relationship could be a profession, and it felt very accessible to me. So that's how I decided to become an art major. And again, just for any others of you that sort of feel like, well, I'm not an artist because I don't like roll out of bed at 3 in the morning with paint in my hair ready to make my newest inspiration. Like it doesn't have to be that. You can definitely be an artist. So I got really into design, and that took me to letterpress, which took me to printmaking. And I say that just because, again, I didn't have that sense of myself that would have given me permission to just say, you know what, I have always been kind of good at this, so I'd like to do it. I never would have given myself that permission. So design was sort of like a sneaky way in the back door where I could sort of just go like in degrees towards becoming an artist. And I still find it really difficult to call myself an artist. So I like to use this as proof. It's from a workshop that I did around the Women's March in 2017 in Washington, D.C. And an Australian news crew came to film it. And when I saw this, I was like, oh man, I guess when I'm at parties and people ask me what I do, I actually have to start saying that now. Because it's a difficult thing to sort of self-identify that way and not wonder if others are going to challenge you or if you're good enough. So I just want to say to everybody here, you are an artist and you are good enough. And I'll talk a little bit about my work now. Um, a really huge influence in the content of my work has to do with what I was talking about before, which is that we all have this really frenetic, overstimulating experience as we are the first humans who are not genetically wired for this. And that thing is living in a post-digital culture. Our fear systems are developed around things like running away from bears, which are short, intense fears, and not things like mortgage payments, which are long sustained fears. So it's kind of difficult to be embodied in this space and time, right? Even when the information we're receiving isn't bad, and even if we're not seeking it out ourselves, we're really inundated and overwhelmed. Um, this sounds low to me, but I guess one Pew Research study said that typical cell phone users between 18 and 24 receive about 50 text messages a day. And so when you think about that, right, like a text message being like, hey, you up, or get bread from the grocery store, like that's all received at the same mental, emotional, intellectual level as hearing about a hospital bombing. So it's really easy to lose track of what you can and can't control and what you yourself might be accountable for when you should detach. We live in an age of anxiety. So I'm really interested in the ways personally that we use tedium to respond to that constant state of anxiety, these existential feelings of helplessness, the way that maybe we have routines and rituals in our lives that are so widely shared that we don't even think of them that way. So this is a large-scale textile work that I made in fall of 2021 at the Fabric Workshop and Museum here in Philadelphia, where I live. I was a print apprentice, and this was created as wallpaper for a waiting room. So I was really interested in playing with this language of pattern. And I wanted to highlight the simple and really absurd distractions in these really uncomfortable spaces that we're all familiar with. So if you zoom in a little bit here, you can see that the pattern itself features several types of magazines. They're like the standard pop culture magazines peddling diets, celebrity lifestyle, but I wanted to juxtapose these against a journalistic spread that references Breonna Taylor and the protests for Black Lives. And then the third magazine features a crossword puzzle, and that references the other piece I made during my apprenticeship there. So this repeat is called Daily Puzzle. It's a 4-way repeat, and it functions as an endless crossword puzzle. It's 4 feet tall and 10 feet wide. And there's this thing inherent to printing repeats on fabric called the jog line, which is where does the pattern begin and where does it end? And on this image, it's not a straight line. So I have things spanning over the jog line, ending on the right, but beginning again on the left. And that means that there's no square tile in this in which an entire puzzle can be contained. It has to exist as like an infinite continuum to be legible. So just to sort of give you a sense of what that looks like, you can see how something like threading a needle becomes reading a needle when it's not there. Just sort of like fun visual nerding out about how this was constructed. But the idea is that we don't have any clues here to provide a framework for what we're seeing. So there are these phrases like 2-day shipping and deli salads, and that exists along things like supply chain or codependency, Dow futures, or excessive force. And so in this, I was thinking about how we each have our own ways of making meaning out of daily life. And to me, this print illustrates the true jumble of our world, especially in terms of how we receive information. It's joyful, it's tragic, it's serious, it's frivolous, it's fact, and it's feeling. And I think a big part of how I experience the world, at least, is that all of these things exist alongside one another at all times. So I'll just share a few more works from a newer series. This is from a series I'm calling City Folk. And so in this, I'm trying to use American folk vernacular to explore this myth that I think many of us have internalized, which is that cities are less virtuous somehow than rural communities. I saw a lot of this come up, especially during the 2016 and 2020 elections, where because of our electoral college system, we sort of see this rush of media to justify the decisions that are being made by a minority. And there's this sort of imbalance that appears. So I'm thinking a little bit about how those stereotypes might do things like exacerbate urban neglect. And so you can see a little bit, I'm referencing quilting and city signage and these other public visual languages as a means through which to study the consequences of things like industrialization and gentrification. And so I think even here, you can see daily rituals like going to the park, riding a bus, waiting for a stoplight. These are all little elements of tedium that we use to ground ourselves and make meaning of place. And last spring, I had the opportunity to translate that work and inject it directly into a political landscape that kind of blurs those boundaries in Morgantown, West Virginia. So in addition to the urban-rural divide and parallel to it, this is also a city and state where political geographies really blend together. So one thing I think a lot about is that we consider this quote unquote natural landscape to just be what exists. But if you read about the history of how rural areas in America came to be, you understand they're really actually quite engineered. That landscape is really groomed and built. So that sort of leads me to thinking again about whose communities are considered natural and wholesome, whose are considered to be manufactured, and why. Piece from the same series where, again, I'm also, as someone who moved a lot, I'm thinking about how capitalism routinely uproots people at unprecedented rates. How these people are often young, white, able-bodied people who might impede other people's cultural traditions or fail to cultivate their own. And I think ultimately for me as someone who couldn't wait to get to a city and now occupies it in a problematic way, of course, is the promise of a city and what it means to all live alongside one another, to see yourself as part of something bigger and complex and dynamic, um, rather than representing like this fear mongering. How do we tell the truth about these urgent needs in cities without creating fear and derision? A couple more recent pieces from these, those of you who have spent time in downtown Philly, and I imagine in the broader Philly area, might recognize a lot of these manhole covers. And the pattern that they're embedded to is an Amish quilt called a wedding ring, a double wedding ring. This is like a quilt that would often be given to someone when they're married. And it's sort of like a funny thing when you look at it, right? You're like, why are manhole covers on a wedding quilt? But I think, again, maybe that just sort of helps us understand these ways in which we're trained to discard some material culture as less than, not worthy of our attention, because it's in our time, because it's in a city, it's not precious or beautiful, but because these other things came from this seemingly wholesome, beautiful culture, we are then able to sort of elevate them and understand them as a beautiful thing that brings people together. And this last one I'll share is a die print on cotton. The sentence in there is a pangram that uses every letter of the alphabet rather than the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And again, thinking of our cities a little bit outside of this Sesame Street version that we all have of them, and realizing, oh, there are actually a lot of Ring doorbells around here. There's a lot of Amazon drop shipping that happens. How does that change a place, and how does that impact the people that have been here a long time? So I'm sort of interested in all of us just thinking about how we can be together and make meaning communally without erasing what's been here before. And on that note, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Nikki, who's going to talk a little bit about print in libraries. I consider libraries to be like our last bastion of public commons, so I'm very excited to hear what Nikki has to say.
Thank you, Katie. I just wanted to say, go ahead and get this started, actually. I previously worked at the Esherick Museum as a visitor experience coordinator, and I'm really happy to be back as a juror again this year. There were so many wonderful pieces submitted. I think every year, I always say there's like so much high quality work, and like Maria said, it's hard to narrow things down with so many great pieces. I've even said like some of the work seems on a college or level or even professional as well. So it was wonderful seeing all of your work. I'm going to talk briefly about my personal art and then discuss a library and archives component, since there can be an intersection between those fields and printmaking. I know a lot of people in archives who are also printmakers, and vice versa, printmakers who take an interest in archives and preservation. So here's a short little bit about me. I'm the library operations supervisor at Penn State Great Valley Library. I have experience in libraries, archives, and museums. I'm passionate about making information accessible. I have my BFA in visual art with an emphasis in printmaking, a minor in art history and women's studies, and my MLIS with a concentration in archives management. The image on the right is a self-portrait that I did. It is sort of, I'm influenced a lot by lesbian sapphic modernism, like Romine Brooks, Gluck, Bernice Abbott, Marie Laurencon, and the work in audience has sort of grown out of that, as well as more contemporary artists like Jenna Gribben. The self-portrait sort of explores gender nonconformity and a sort of sense of seeing ourselves in LGBTQ art. So go on with the next slide. That did not work. Sorry. Technical problems there. There we go. I work in a variety of mediums, and as I said, my undergrad was in printmaking. I enjoy doing primarily collagraphs and intaglio. This is one of my collagraphs. It's 30 by 40, which is a fairly large scale to work at for printmaking, but I'm an artist with a disability, and that's a scale that works best for me. I have a disability called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so there's sometimes issues with joint instability and dislocation. So the larger scale is more ergonomic, more accessible. The Wharton Esherick Museum does a lot to support artists with disabilities and visitors to the museum as well. Everyone involved is always cognizant of access. I just wanted to add that printmaking has a large variety of processes, and you can really experiment and see what works best for you as an artist, and really tailor it to your interests, skills, and abilities as well. So, Katie mentioned lithography. That might be a little bit challenging for some of us doing the large stones with litho meaning stone. I've also explored a variety of other media and their connection to printmaking. So one thing that I've explored was jewelry design, uh, really thinking design-wise about images and designing in a very graphic quality. I think working with lino cut like you all are doing or wood block, that's really changed how I've thought about jewelry making as well. There's physicality to printmaking that really transfers well to either jewelry making, ceramics, sculpture as well. You can see it in Wharton Esherick's work, his transition from painting to printmaking to eventually sculpture. These were originally done on a computer with some very precise measurements. I use Blender and ZBrush for them, but there's a lot of programs available like SketchUp or Maya. This is where I'm going to get into the library and archives component. So printmakers can gravitate towards archives, libraries, or special collections. I think there's something about the physical material or printed word or image. Making images can be very archival of society itself as a printmaker, really capturing cultural heritage. They're really related fields and in some ways really tied together. I also think Katie mentioned being a graphic designer in the past. So there's a lot of career paths and avenues you can take as an artist. You can see the obvious sort of progression here, digitization. You're working with material to make copies of it. That's may have had heard of the medieval scribes working in illuminated manuscripts, Gutenberg, the printing press, making copies. Even though this is a photography-based process, to me it's very similar. For a while, I worked as a digitization technician. I digitized the J.T. Walter Thompson Company collection at Duke University, as well as a portion of the Arnsberg collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, working with the digital archivist there. So the material's now up on the Duchamp research portal. And I think digitization really lets people across the world study the work of artists, even if they're not able to see the work in person. So if there's prints that are available in special collections, artist books, that sort of thing, they might not be available on the same level that your typical printed book would, that, you know, pick up a paperback copy of Harry Potter or something. And that's not as widely available. And like I said, digitization is more photography, and a very scientific photography is that. It's not a printmaking process. It's very methodical and exact. You see the slide there. That's hopefully the GIF is running and working, but a GIF of the sort of process of digitizing images, archives boxes as well. Again, I'm so sorry. It's because I'm on a Mac. Bookbinding has also been a very valuable skill, working in libraries and archives. In archives, you can create specialized cases for the material, clamshell or portfolio cases. It's a very hands-on process. In libraries, we do a fair amount of book repair too. I also make miniature books on the side, sometimes artist books. You might be interested as a printmaker in the preservation of printmaking artifacts. So archives and libraries often collect, preserve, and provide access to the historical printmaking artifacts, prints, plates, sketches, documents related to printmaking techniques and artists. Just as you might think of the quality of materials you're choosing to make sure they're archival and can be shared in the future, archivists work to ensure the continued preservation and access. It's also come in quite handy in book displays in the library. So I've did cut out silhouettes that very much came inspired from my printmaking background, doing lino cuts, the very graphic quality. This was for our Douglas Day transcription event. I've also worked on an interactive timeline for the Penn State Great Valley campus. We had our 60th anniversary this year. So I thought I'd share, no need to try to read the poster, just thought I would share some of the highlights. So creating materials in 3D, the digital sort of process. I was able to use satellite images of the campus and then recreate the architectural models in Blender. And our engineering lab manager was able to replicate, use the 3D printer to print my models as well. So I just thought I'd share that. If you're an artist, you might be interested in doing that, as well as there's a possibility to go into architecture, game art, and design as well. The printmaking aspect was useful for these because the material that was 3D printed out was actually PLA, and printmaking, some of the mixing of the inks is very much like baking. So I found it was very helpful to be able to mix the paint that I needed to use on the PLA. There wasn't really a paint that was working on it, so I hand mixed the paint for it. You can also use these 3D processes in your printmaking work as well. So if you're interested in doing the prints and using that to create a plate, you're able to do that. Just keeping in mind that the resolution will never be as high as something that's in print. So there's always something about print that's truly just remarkable by itself. You can take an image with a $50,000 camera doing digitization, and it will never have the high quality that something that you do handmade, either lino cut or in etching as well. And then there's the finished pieces that are on display at the Penn State campus. And I'm actually running a lot shorter than Katie, but here's my contact information. If you, any of you want to get into contact or ask questions, learn any additional information, feel free to take that down. And again, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for submitting such wonderful, interesting work. You all should definitely be proud of yourselves. Stop sharing.
Well said, Nikki. Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Okay, thanks again to both of you, Katie and Nikki. That was great. So happy we got to hear from you, and I hope that you're taking some inspiration for your future path after school. So I want to move right along and get you back outside to enjoy this beautiful spring day. But we can't do that without first honoring the stars of our show, this year's winners. So I wanted to take some time to highlight the top prize winners, and then I'm going to direct you to the show where you can see all of our finalists. So our Viewer's Choice winner this year, with a landslide of 173 votes, is Symphony of Bonds by Izzy Tigro of Abington Senior High School. Congratulations to you, Izzy. In his piece, he explores the rhythms of relationships in his life, which is such beautiful work. For those of you who may not be familiar, every year we take all of our submissions and put them up on our Facebook page. And we invite Facebook fans and schools to log on and like their favorite one, and the one with the most likes wins Viewer's Choice. Third place, also of Abington, another great showing for Abington this year, is Maddie McCann's Let Them Be. This is such great work, Maddie. I understand Maddie agreed to say a few words about her work. Maddie, are you here?
Yeah, I'm here.
What would you like to tell us?
So I wrote a little speech. Through my works of art, I aspire to bring light to little creatures, such as insects, and recognize what they do for us. This piece is about for our benefit. The original piece was done in colored pencil, and I decided to make a lino cutout out of it. I used a technique for this called chinkole, which is layering paper to create depth and contrast in the printed image. I believe my work piece works very well with the theme of rhythm because the honeycomb is repeated pattern that creates flow. I also added little lines around the piece to create movement, which is one of the ways they communicate with each other. I also love lino cuts as I love experimentation and pattern to bring awareness to something that is very easily overlooked. I do plan on making more lino cuts in the future, as I enjoy the process of carving them, as well as the element of surprise when you first pull that first print. Next year, I will be attending honors college at Rowan University, and I plan on majoring in biomedical art and visualization with a minor in biology. And I'd also like to thank my art teachers for helping me make this. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Maddie. That was great, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. So congratulations to you again. Our second place winner is Andrew Hawkinson of Council Rock High School South. Congratulations to you, Andrew. In this easy cut called Human, Andrew is exploring the rhythms of society. And first place goes to Brandon Bacordo, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, please correct me, of Abington Senior High School. So congratulations to you, Brandon. Brandon has also graciously agreed to share a few words about his beautiful work. Brandon, are you here?
Yes, I'm here, everyone. Hello. So I'm Brandon. I'm a junior at Abington Senior High School. I currently take art too, and my goals for the future is to create an animation studio where people can show their ideas to the world and leave a lasting impression and legacy on present and future generations. My inspirations for my art piece were the different human environments that make up the world, and even though they are wildly different from each other, they share one rhythm in common, the rhythm of time and the earth, which not only serves as a central point in the artwork, but also serves as a conversion point for all environments. To further emphasize that point, the plaza in the center has 12 spokes, representing a clock and turning the plaza into a sundial to tell the time. My process in doing this artwork was to first make a thumbnail, and then after I did that thumbnail and I got my final idea, I moved to a larger piece of paper to draw out the basic idea and do the line art. And after that, I digitized it in Procreate to figure out where I'd put black and white. And I'm going to tell you, it was a lot of lines that also, which was also to emphasize the rhythm, the various rhythms of each environment, with the urban areas being more orderly, while like the rural areas were more organic per se. After I finished the Procreate sketch, I printed it out and I used carbon paper to trace all the lines over the linoleum sheet. And then and I took it off, drew in every black area with a Sharpie, and then painted over it so I could see what I was doing, and then I carved it out. I'm going to also admit to you that while I was carving it, it made a ginormous mess, and I did nick myself a couple times. It was a bit painful, but in the end, I got a beautiful piece of artwork, and I got first place. So all that pain and hard work was really worth it. This was my first time using linoleum for any sort of artwork, and although it takes a long time, I really enjoyed the process and it was calming and fun. So I'll definitely do that. I'll definitely use linoleum in future artworks.
That's so great to hear. Thank you so much, Brandon. And we hope that you'll enter this competition or other competitions in future years as well. Okay, so before we go, I wanted to direct you to our webpage, wharton-esherickmuseum.org, to view the full show. You want to go to Programs and Exhibitions and Imprint 2024. And there you will see all of our finalists. So please feel free to enjoy that when we get done here. So now before we wrap up, I want to invite you to unmute yourselves and make any comments or ask any questions you may have. Okay, well, if they come to you later, you can always email us. You can reach me at maria@wharton-esherickmuseum.org or info@wharton-esherickmuseum.org, or give us a call. I don't know about you, artists, non-artists alike, but I'm kind of inspired to go create something now. So I hope that you're all inspired as well by these amazing students. There is a Wharton Esherick Museum tradition where we all kind of unmute ourselves at the same time and say goodbye. So I invite you to do that now. All right, goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye. Thanks for watching. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Congratulations, everyone.
Yeah, bye. Have a good day.
Goodbye. Oh, there it goes.
Congratulations and thank you, everybody.
Goodbye.